Lord, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be in tune with your love and power. O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. This morning, after the siege on the Capitol, I received this Facebook post. I'd like to cancel my subscription to 2021. I've experienced the free 7-day trial, and I'm not interested. Wouldn't it be great if we could just choose the reality we want to face? But of course, that's not how it works, right? We don't get to choose reality. We got to face reality, whatever it is that is presented to us. And the reality is we have a mess on our hands in America. We do. But I believe that something good and true and beautiful is wanting to be born. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't think anybody knows. But I have a sense that it is a multicultural democracy that wants to be a light to the rest of the world. But I've been told that childbirth is messy and painful. And I think this moment is messy and it's painful. Today I want to offer reflections on the state of affairs in our nation in light of this text from the Acts of the Apostle. I want to begin by reflecting on the blind spots and the gifts of postmodernism, which is the developmental stage that 25 to 30% of humanity finds itself at today. I want to explore the challenges and the opportunities that we have to either move forward or to move backwards right now. And I want to suggest that we can speak with moral clarity, as Paul did in the midst of this time right now, this postmodern era. An overwhelming amount of data and research shows that human beings evolve through various stages of moral development and various levels of human consciousness. And at the risk of oversimplification, here's the 3 stages. Me, we, us. That's the movement. That the Spirit of God is at work in all of our lives. The lower level stages are about me. It's about our immediate family, our needs, our desires. The second level is about we. It's about the tribe. It's about our religious team. It's about our community. It's about our nation. And the highest level is about all of humanity, all of creation, including the health of our planet. And each level of development transcends and includes the previous level of development. So the way a molecule transcends an atom and includes an atom, the way a cell transcends and includes a molecule, that's what I want you to think about as we evolve through these different stages. So the healthiest human beings among us have a healthy me. You never lose that. They have a healthy sense of we. They realize that they need to belong to a larger group, and they have a healthy sense of us, what's best for all people and creation itself. Now, each level also has unhealthy elements to it, and I'm going to talk about that, so just hold on to that thought. But experiential learning, spiritual practice, great love and great suffering have shown the power to move people to higher levels of moral development and consciousness. And the gospel, which is God's great gift to the world, has the power to move people from me to we to us, as it did for Paul, who was inspired, of course, by Jesus, and who Jesus was the highest level human being to ever walk this planet. He was way ahead of his time. He was an us-level person living in a me and we world, which is, by the way, why he was misunderstood, why he was rejected, and why he was ultimately killed. Because the world was not ready for Jesus. And I believe today more people are ready for the way and the teachings of Jesus than at any time in human history. And that's why I'm hopeful, and that's why I'm excited, because I think more people are ready to move from we to us than ever before. In the 1960s, we reached a tipping point where 10% of the world's people began to be thinking from a postmodern level. That was the first time. And any time 10% of the population gets somewhere, they become the leading edge of the community. These were people who were at the, quote, green level, if you're familiar with spiral dynamics. And this level is no longer focused on just me and we, but begins to focus on us, on all of our needs. But here's the problem. The people who emerged at that level have not led us effectively. They haven't. They have not been able to lead the masses, and in fact, they failed to lead. One of the ways you can understand the 2016 election is that there has been a resistance, a revolt against the mean greens, against people who've risen to a higher level but show disdain and disrespect to people who are below them. And we heard when Hillary Clinton called people deplorable, when Barack Obama mentioned the people who cling to their guns and religions, that's an example of a mean green, somebody who's risen to a certain level and hasn't understood that love and respect needs to be at the center. I don't mean to disparage either of those people, but that was clearly a mistake. And a lot of the revolution against that is a response to something that is wrong. And that's one of the ways that I don't hear a lot of people talking about why the current president was elected. The reality is you can't lead people if you don't love and respect them. You just can't. That's a fundamental universal truth. So here are the big ideas of the green level of consciousness. Number one, that knowledge is in part a social construct, it's context-bound, and it's influenced by the interpreter. Don't take my word for it. Look at all the data and research that supports that. Number two, history has to be looked at critically because it's often written by the victors. And it looks differently if you've won than if you've lost. Postmodernism has helped us to see that. Postmodernism has helped us to see that what poses for truth is often just what has been advanced by an oppressive force, and you can list all of the oppressive forces. And then finally, postmodernism teaches us that every human being is of equal value, that every human being has dignities. These are good ideas. These have helped us move forward as a species. They have allowed and created the conditions for people to rise to a higher level of moral development and a higher level of consciousness of seeing. They gave birth to the civil rights movement. They gave birth to an environmentalism that cares about the littlest of creatures. It has given birth to personal and professional feminism. It's given birth to drives for sustainability in business and on and on. It has inspired a critical mass of people for the first time to actually want genuine inclusivity. This has never happened in our world's history. On the surface, all of this is good. But it's never as simple as that. The story of where we are right now is a whole lot messier. The green level, in its unhealthy form, devolves into what Ken Wilber calls aperspectival madness. And that's where we find ourselves in. This is the false belief that there is no truth, that all truth is relative, that it's all, quote, fake news. This is aperspectival madness. Anybody who tries to tell you that there is no truth, that the truth is only what the powerful have managed to convince the powerless, is moving into aperspectival madness. Whether the powerful are white supremacists or whether they are the coastal elites. The left loves to talk about white supremacy and the right loves to talk about those cultural elites. But in many ways, it's the same mindset. It's the same conspiracy theory. It's basically saying there is no truth. It's only what the powerful have imposed upon you. This is aperspectival madness. And we have to resist this at every turn. Because when there is no truth with a capital T and there is only relative truth, then the best morality we can come to is what's good for me is good for me, and what's good for you is good for you, so you go your way and I go mine. And if everything has been conditioned by race or gender or sexual orientation and there is no common universal experience, then we can't meet anywhere substantial. There's no universal experience of being human. That is aperspectival madness. And when we say that all truth claims are really just a power grab, as many suggest, then all we have is a power struggle, which we see today. And leaders who have no sense of the big truth, who have no sense of the universal moral binding norms, can't lead people in a healthy and constructive way. They can only lead us to narcissism and nihilism. And that's where we are. The radical left and the radical right are narcissists and nihilists at their core. And we got to speak out against that. And when this happens, evolution comes to a screeching halt. It spins. It gets stuck. It can't move. It closes in on itself. And we're seeing that in America today, which brings me to my final point today, which is how the church can speak with moral clarity right now. When I was installed as your pastor 6 years ago, the first sermon series I wanted to do in Lent was the 6 great ends of the church, because if we want to move forward in a healthy way, we got to know where we're coming from. And here are the first of the 5 great ends of the church: the proclamation of the gospel for the salvation of humankind, the shelter, nurture, and spiritual fellowship of the children of God, the maintenance of divine worship, the promotion of social righteousness, and the exhibition of the kingdom of heaven to the world. Now, right away, you can see as Presbyterians, we are called to engage reality, to engage in the political realities of our time. I know people say the church shouldn't be involved in politics. That's crazy. Politics is where things happen, and the church needs to have a voice in the political sphere. And the reality is, we got a mess on our hands. We have seen the great abyss. We know what it looks like when a nation no longer has love for each other, when there isn't a sense of togetherness, and there is no moral center. We've all been given glimpses of this. When a nation is no longer committed to justice and righteousness for its most vulnerable citizens, and when it's no longer committed to being a model, a light to the rest of the world. It's an ugly, ugly picture. It's horrifying and it's disheartening. And the church has to speak out against it. We have to stand up and resist aperspectival madness. And we got to be the conscience of our nation, the way Dr. King challenged us to be in the 60s. If we are to honor our tradition, the great ends of the church, we've got to proclaim God's love for all people, no exceptions, including those on the opposite side of the political spectrum from us. We've got to create space for people to have genuine community across differences. We got to keep our focus and keep other people's focus on the sacred, on the divine, on the most essential things of what it means to be human. We have to promote social righteousness and justice in the world wherever we see it. We have to challenge injustice. And we have to not just preach the gospel. We got to live it. We got to share it with our humanity. But I want to talk about the 6th great end, which is the preservation of the truth. How do you preserve the truth in a post-truth world? How do you preserve the truth when people are saying there's no truth? It's all fake news. That's the challenge that we have today. We got to resist this madness. It's crazy to suggest there is no truth. We got to risk being displeasing and misunderstood by the left and the right if we are to speak the truth with love. Because the left and the right, in their most radical extremes, don't believe there's a perspective beyond their limited understanding, and that's a problem. Third, we got to develop leaders who are grounded in the universal in an age of relativity. And fourth, we got to preach a gospel that actually moves people forward from me to we to us, rather than move us backwards. Which brings us to Paul, who has impacted not only Christian history, but human history more than anybody in our history, other perhaps than Jesus, but even that's debatable. Paul encountered the truth and the love and light of Christ, who he saw as the essence of the good and the true and the beautiful. Paul took Jesus' words seriously when Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. And he inspired people to be, quote, followers of the way. Did you notice that today? Paul was ridiculed. His followers were ridiculed because people didn't believe in the way, and they publicly slandered the way of Christ. But because Paul was who he was, because he was bold in proclaiming the gospel is more widely shared and deeply held than any ideology in human history. It is God's gift to the world. We ought to be grateful for Paul. Paul is a large part of the reason that we're here, and I find great hope in Paul because his articulation of the gospel was a catalyst for moral development and the evolution of human consciousness. And today we got to channel our inner Paul because we are told that he provided convincing arguments on the nature of God's kingdom. At a time when we're flattening hierarchy at every step, we have to return to a hierarchy of truth. We ought to not shy away from the reality that when the gospel is well articulated, when the gospel is fully embodied, it is the highest level that we can ever attain. We ought not shy away from that. We ought to push back against people who do not believe that there are some ways of living that are better than other ways. We ought not shy away from people who want to challenge us and say that there are not some things that are truer than other things. There are some things that are truer than other things, and there are some lives that are better than other lives. Not different value, but a different quality. And we all know it. There are some human beings who we want to be like, and there are some human beings we're horrified at watching what they do. This is the truth. Period, full stop. There is a hierarchy of truth, and we got to not shy away from that. And the fancy word for this is the title of the sermon, Christian Polemics. Now, that's a phrase that may make you uncomfortable. I got to be honest, it makes me uncomfortable. The word polemics is derived from the Greek polemicus, which means warlike or hostile. We've all witnessed the horrors of war. We've all experienced hostile people, probably this week in particular. And it makes us uncomfortable to think that faith is a war. It's a battle. But it is. But what we're fighting for is as important as how we fight. And we must never forget that the means can never justify the ends. The means and the ends have to be congruent. And I find it beautiful, strangely beautiful in this text, that we don't even know what Paul says. We're just told that he has convincing arguments because what Paul says is not what we're supposed to say today, because Paul was speaking to different people at a different time, in a different place, at a different level of moral development and human consciousness. He was speaking to the Greco-Roman mind, which is different than the postmodern mind or the modern mind, which many of us are speaking to today. But like Paul, we have to articulate the gospel in a way that moves us forward and doesn't pull us back. That will help us move through the madness that we find ourselves in, because more people are ready for the truth than ever before. We're actually capable of understanding things that our mind was not capable of 100, 200, 1,000 years ago. So we have to proclaim Christian polemics in a postmodern age. So here's the deal. Our articulation of the gospel has to be open to the data and the research, the reality of what the postmodernism has opened up for us. We have to acknowledge that, yes, knowledge is in part a social construct. It's in part context-bound. It's in part influenced by the interpreter, and this includes knowledge of the Bible. Point number one. It is true that oppressive forces are at play in our world and have shaped human history and Christian history and American Christian history. It's true. It's a fundamental truth. And it's also true that the heart of the gospel is an embrace of all people and all creation. It is true that every person has intrinsic value and dignity. Where do you not see that? In the teachings and in the way of Jesus. Tim Keller argues that at its best, Christian polemics is medicine, not food. Without medicine, we know that people will die. We can't live without medicine if we want to be healthy. But we also can't live on medicine as if it were food. And we can't survive on medicine alone. So engaging in arguments for argument's sake is not the goal of Christian polemics. But discerning what's essential and what is non-essential, what's universal and what isn't, that's the work of our time. And we ought to argue convincingly for the universals and the essentials. We ought to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff. When Peter was challenged by Paul, Paul was saying to Peter that the gospel is not just for the tribe of Jews, it's for everybody, it's for the Gentiles as well. And we wouldn't be here without Paul's challenge of Peter. Paul was focused on the essentials. He was focused on leading people towards us and out of this us-them thinking that takes a hold of the human ego. He was calling us to a deeper unity. He didn't engage in arguments for argument's sake. He fought for the truth with love. He didn't manipulate, demonize, or bully Peter. No. He attempted to persuade him. And he did. In the end, Peter was won over to Paul's side because the gospel is on Paul's side, as it is on our side if we articulate it well and we live out the message that we proclaim. It seems to me that we need gospel medicine now more than ever, but we also got to administer it well. One of the most famous Christian polemicists says that polemics is honorable but dangerous. It's dangerous because when we attack people's views, we often attack their humanity. And we ought not to do that. We ought to never attack a human being. We ought to attack their ideas, their viewpoints. And when we challenge our culture, this is really important. We must attack the madness, which is evil. But we ought not to attack postmodernism, which at its best is good. And when we fight, we got to fight the right way, with boldness and humility, because we're all coming to understand the deeper truths of the gospel. I think we've seen in spades this playing out. And as I wrote in my letter to you this week, and if you haven't seen it, I will resend it to you, I think the truth is clear, that words matter. Words can tear down, they can incite, they can harm, but the words of the gospel, words inspired by the gospel, build up, lift up, inspire, and heal, and that's what we ought to be about. I think we all know how destructive violence is, and I know that people who commit violence, there's probably a truth to their cause somewhere deep inside, under the ugliness of violence, but that does not accomplish what they long to accomplish. And in the end, nonviolence is so hard, but it's the only thing that can make a difference. It's the only thing that changes things. And yes, authoritative leadership feels great. It looks powerful, but it's weak. It's incredibly weak. And servant leadership, which always seems powerless, is what's most powerful in a leader. And as we witness what it looks like to go into that abyss, and by the way, we're all going to be affected. There's no way of escaping the abyss if that's where we're headed as a country. Let's remember what Paul held on to: faith, hope, and love. Not the kind of faith that preserves the status quo and is safe, no, but faith that is risky, that challenges the status quo. That's the faith that is better. Not the hope that is wishful thinking and fuzzy passivity. No. A hope inspired by the gospel, by the vision of the kingdom of heaven. Hope that demands action. That's what we're called to. That's the better way. And love, not sentimentality, syrupy powerlessness, demanding nothing of us, demanding nothing of our children, demanding nothing of others. No, that's not the love that Paul's talking about. The love that is the only thing powerful enough to change anything. The love that demands our all and everyone else's. Let us pray. Lord, help us to speak with moral clarity in this moment. Help us to be healthy and constructive leaders. Help us to see our shadow and remove the log from our eye so that we can see clear enough to recognize our shared humanity and the dignity and value of every human being. Amen.